Welcome back to Generational Sense. I'm here with my dad, Brian, and I'm Nate.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, and so we're excited today to be sharing a little bit more about some money tips for you to grow some generational wealth and make some more sense of it. So today we're going to be talking a lot about budgeting. And so, of course, I'm growing. I'm getting a full-time job here. And so I'm excited to be having, full-time income, but one of the most difficult things that I've struggled with over time was, whether I have a fluctuating income or, now that I'm on full-time income, how exactly should I be budgeting? So today I'm going to be asking my dad a few questions about that. And so first, kind of just start us off, when creating a budget from scratch, are there any first steps that you're generally taking with creating a budget?
Nate, so first of all, I want to tell you how much I hate this topic. And I think probably everybody listening or who finds this topic hates this topic. None of us
Yeah.
want to have to create a budget.
No.
I have always struggled with it psychologically because I'm a proud breadwinning man, and so it's tough to go in and say, well, I don't have enough money for all my wants or sometimes
Right.
even those needs. And so I can
Absolutely.
relate to anyone who's out there thinking about this and struggling with it because it
Right.
truly is one of those things that weighs on the psychology and the mental health of a person. So with that,
Yeah.
we'll try to be helpful. I
Okay.
think number one, how do you create that budget is to work on your mind, your emotions, those things that hold us back, because it's really
Right.
easy if we're in a bad place emotionally to not stick to a budget, to not make a budget, to not be able to do the things that are necessary to stay afloat financially. I think a lot of times when our emotions get the best of us, it's kind of like binge eating. It's one of those things that we turn to spending a little bit of money, doing a little shopping or something like that to try to make ourselves feel better, which in the long run does not, because we end up possibly making the situation worse. So we do need to understand how to create a budget and help out with that.
Right.
Where do we
So,
start?
yeah. So, I mean, like you mentioned a lot there, it's quite a bit about the psychology behind, and the psychological aspect of budgeting. You want to make sure that you've got time and money for yourself to be able to enjoy life, because it's not all about, how much money you've got coming or how much is going out. You need to be able to enjoy yourself and live life. But it's also it's stressful. Money's a big issue with a lot of relationships and family and things like that. And so it's important because you got to make sure you're you're staying afloat without causing issues, but you're also living life and have the ability to spend money.
Yeah.
I'm curious. What maybe psychological barriers have you seen when it comes to budgeting? Um, what's kind of keeping people from starting, or what's really keeping people from, maybe they've started, they've created one, but actually carrying through with it?
Yeah, too much chocolate in the cupboard.
Yeah.
And it's so easy nowadays to get on Amazon or go into the Walmart or shop downtown, whatever your flavor is, and to spend money. And so we
Right.
have to first sit down and do some real mindset uh, planning. I won't say
Right.
shifting because maybe our mindset is fine. And I don't want to say for anybody that it's not. Um,
Yeah.
but looking at that mindset and knowing that you're okay with making some adjustments in order to do the budget. Because the
Right.
first thing you're going to have to do is be willing to accept reality when you're making that budget. Nowadays, with easy access to credit through credit cards and things like that, and knowing that we're going to get that next paycheck and let's go ahead and spend it in advance. we've got to get our mind in the right place. And if you are unable to do that, then I think the first step is to work on that, because there's no
Right.
sense in you stressing yourself out, making matters worse by creating a budget if you're not yet in the right place and right mind. So
Right.
maybe even go to the extent of getting some counseling or some therapy with someone who can help with that. And that may actually mean spending some money, but it
Yeah.
would hopefully in the long run be money well spent. So let's start with that as step one. Let's get
Absolutely.
the mind right. Okay, we're ready to budget. Now what do we do?
Right.
That be your next question?
Yeah. So we're ready. We're ready to budget. How exactly should you be breaking apart your budget into different categories? So of course this could be different for everybody. Everybody's got their big spends. Everybody's got their categories that they need the most. I've heard a lot about like a 5-30-20 rule. So what are your kind of 2 cents on splitting up your budget into different categories so you know where you should be starting with that, actually breaking that budget down?
Sure. So, how much goes into what bucket is going to vary some depending on where you live, what your salary is, what your income would be. Um, so let's just start with absolute necessities, those household expenses that are going to be there week in and week out, and look at those things. That'll be a bucket. Things like utilities, groceries, transportation bucket. So you could think of budgeting and categorization as buckets or categories or uh, columns in a spreadsheet, however it helps you. Old Dave Ramsey teaches the envelope system, and my
Yeah.
wife and I, your mom and I, we actually used that for a while back in the
Yeah.
'90s when we were young, like you, and money was super tight. We put cash in envelopes, and we would carry it around, and each envelope had a category written on it, and then one of those categories can be like you were saying. How much money do we have that we can use for things we just want?
Yeah.
The so-called blow it and never see it again envelope, where you just try to have some fun with something you enjoy, whether it be, going to a ball game or
Yeah.
buying a purse or a coat or some clothing, or hanging out with friends, having a few drinks or something. So, there's that envelope for the
Right.
unnecessary things that make life a little more pleasurable. Now, there may be seasons in life where you really need to minimize that envelope, uh, depending on your situation. Let's say you've taken on some credit card debt and you need to pay off that card. Now you've got a category for debt. That's a category
Right.
we never want to have. And so
Yeah.
that's why we have another category for emergency fund, money that we're going to build up to about, well, people differ on this, so it may depend on your comfort zone, but 3 months to a year of your salary in a savings account, preferably one that, like we talked about last week, that pays pretty good interest
Yeah.
based on the market rates at the time. But you want it to be highly liquid, that you can access it through an immediate transfer within 24 hours or so, and get to it in case of an emergency. For me, that happened about every 12 to 18 months, my first 10 years, because we kept having babies, and and I never planned for any babies, and so we never had maternity insurance. Back then,
Yeah.
maternity was not automatically included in your health plans, and so we never had maternity insurance. So about every 18 months to 3 years, I had to come up with about $25,000 to pay for a baby, and that just always seemed to be about where I'd gotten in building up my emergency savings at the time,
Yeah.
and trying to pay myself first. So buckets, your
Yeah.
household necessities, utilities, grocery, food,
Yeah.
things like that, your transportation, your emergency fund, and look at your life, figure out what is absolutely necessary to live. Does anything else come to your mind that's absolutely necessary?
Well, I wanted to mention, so you did mention like that kind of debt category that's not ideal. Nobody needs to have that debt or wants that debt. Um, But to take into consideration that sometimes it may be natural to the sense of just the this level at life you're in right now. So say for example, right now I'm planning for a wedding. So there's going to be a pretty hefty expense there that I don't think that luckily will go into much debt if any. Uh, but naturally for many people, if they're not budgeting their wedding right, or if they're just struggling to keep it, on the lower budget end, that could bring in some debt. So there's natural debt like that, or maybe you say kids and different things as you're kind of growing up through life. So we can have I know there's podcasts out there that have gone through that, but just to take note of that, and as you're taking that into account, there are going to be those kind of just life expenses that the emergency can help with, but I feel like that's not the only kind of source for those types of things. I think those are good to be saving up for over time, and so saving category is going to play a big role in a lot of those as well. So I just kind of wanted to side note that. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that as well.
I do. You are really getting to the crux of the issue when it comes to budgeting, and that is that you will always, and it feels like right now it's just a wedding,
Yeah.
but you will always have that next thing that
Right.
you want to go ahead and spend money on. And that's what can sabotage saving for retirement, saving and investing for big things like a nice home one day,
Right.
and can lead to the buildup of debt. And so I just caution you and everybody about that sort of spending, because anything where you budget it in knowing that it's accumulating some debt and it's not fitting within the actual budget, or it's taking the place of another priority, such as the emergency savings, or say the 10% you want to set aside for retirement, or say the 10% you want to set aside for that 20% down on your first home, or say that 5% you want to set aside for replacing your car in 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're taking very important categories that are necessary to live life, and you're sabotaging potentially those categories by having a more expensive wedding. And I'm not bashing you about your wedding plans,
No, you're
but
good.
or having a nicer television, or going on that vacation this year that you just desperately want to go on. And those are the things that go back to step one, is having your mindset and your mental
Right.
state in the right place. Because if those things, saying no to those things, or if the debt from going ahead and doing those things, if either one of those things cause you to have psychological and emotional problems, then you're back at step one. So
Right.
that's why I hate budgeting, because it's always put me at step one.
Yeah.
And it's been something where I'll just be honest. I've I've never liked it, and
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself, preach to myself here.
Yeah.
At some point, I should have stopped and said, you know what, I want to go get some counseling for this and help somebody build up my own moral fortitude to say no to spending on those things that seem like the next thing I want. Um, and it's
Yeah.
not that I did a bad job. I've always known what the priorities were, and
Yeah.
so I would focus on those things. But I would also succumb too often to those temptations in that those buckets
Hmm.
that should just be in that one envelope for blowing money, and then keeping that envelope where when it's empty, you say no.
Yeah.
And that might mean, and I'm going to use you an example, it's not at all an insinuation,
No,
but
you're
that
good.
might mean changing your plans for that wedding, or changing your plans for where you buy that special gift for someone, maybe, or what that gift can be, or changing your plans for where you go for vacation or how you vacation. It doesn't mean you have to give up living life. Hopefully, now if you're, there are seasons in life where someone maybe loses a job, or is trying to work their way up the ladder, and right now they're not getting paid hardly anything.
Right. Yeah.
There are seasons in life where literally the things we do for fun may have to be free.
Right.
We go get a
Yeah.
$12 antenna and put it on the TV, and that's what we do for entertainment. And then we go and walk in the park for spending time with the kids or whatever. But, so those are such difficult mental decisions that are
Right.
there and are going to face us throughout life. Sorry, I kind of,
No,
but
you're good.
I think that's the crux of it is we can teach
Yeah.
budgeting all day long, but unless step one is right, then we're going to succumb to that temptation to make that envelope for the blow money expand beyond its what our finances allow us to do. Or here's something that happened to me that I regret. Uh, we we dipped into the Roth IRA to uh, pay for an emergency. And so that's why it's important to build that emergency fund.
Yeah.
Now, in our situation, we had an emergency fund, but through some overspending, we dipped into it first and it went away. And some of that was not overspending. Some of it, the wife, we always sit down, we're like, well, we had to do that and we had to do that, and so um, that's, and sometimes that may be the case.
Yeah.
But that's why having that budget all along, when you are deciding, do you have to do that? If you're looking at your categories and you're seeing what you've spent and that have to falls within a category, then it's something to think about. Well, why is my budget what it is and why do I have to do this? And really, and, and again, having the mental fortitude to go and be willing to take that step.
Yeah. Well, patience is a big part of it too. I know, this is going back to step one at one as well, but patience is a big part, and that's played a big part for me so far. It's just the fact of like, do I want to put the money towards, furniture as we've moved into our apartment, but it's furniture that I don't really need or don't really want right now. Well, it's something I want, but I don't necessarily need right now, or do I want to put that money towards the wedding? And so it's just like that type of budgeting. It's like smart choice would probably be the wedding because we don't need it right now, but the wedding is more important to us right now on just breaking down those spend categories. It's like we're going to be spending that money and it's in the category to be spent, but which way are we going to put that? And are we going to have to end up spending that money double in the future regardless, because it's something that's going to be, like you're kind of saying, it was a have to, compared to something that wasn't a have to, but we already spent it. So I think it's a lot of patience as well, of that money could be better spent somewhere else right now. So saying no to those purchases, but as well as just the impulse buying. I'm in marketing, so trust me, impulse buying we live on, but at the same time, from a consumer standpoint, impulse buying is very detrimental to your bank account if you're not able to control and not make those quick decisions to purchase things.
Let's go through some of your questions, Nate.
Yeah.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the psychological barriers to budgeting. First steps to creating a budget from scratch. We've talked some about that, but let me just organize it for everyone. And that is sitting down with your expenses by looking at your activity and your checking account on your credit card and breaking it all out into categories and looking at what it has been. And then looking at that and deciding what was necessary, what was absolutely. You're looking at what has been, you're categorizing those things, you're determining what was actually necessary, and that creates your baseline budget within those categories for what you know you have to have in the way of income. Now, let's say that your baseline is more than what you make in your household. What do you do about that? So what I would suggest is you think about where can you save money? Can you find a less expensive apartment, for instance? Could you refinance your mortgage? Could you look at eating out less? Could you look at changing your subscriptions? So you just have to dig in, look for ways to cut. Now, if you know you can't do that, then you need more income. So you're going to have to think about, well, what path am I on that's going to increase that income? Can I look for another job now based on my skills and what I'm able to do? Do I need to get some more education, earn some certifications somehow? Thankfully, nowadays, you can do a lot of that for free online, using a library, things like that. But put yourself on a path to a higher income. That can be helpful. Do you have a partner who might could earn some money and do something part-time, or can you do something part-time in your circumstances? So you just have to make those things work for your budget. So that's those are the first steps.
Yeah.
You've
So,
got
and
a good question here. Did you have something you wanted to address on that?
Uh, so I wanted to kind of ask, kind of growing on that, so we're talking about kind of reviewing those spending habits. How often do you think we should be doing that? Is it weekly? Is it biweekly? Is it monthly? So I know like I've got a monthly budget, but it's probably better for me to be reviewing my expenses and spending habits maybe a little bit more than that.
It is a stressful activity, so you have to
Yeah.
determine what your needs are to do it frequently. One every year at least. But if you can, and that's even for somebody who is having no problem budgeting, it is important because say you're going to retire in 20 years, that seems like
Yeah.
a long ways off. But at the same time, you need to sit down and know what you're going to need for retirement. If you want to retire comfortably, how comfortably, this is where getting set up with a financial planner could be a huge benefit because you may not realize that you need $2.5 million at retirement based on your current spending patterns and the lifestyle you would want to live. And maybe you're only on track to save, a three-quarter million or $1 million.
Yeah.
And you may not realize. So that's why an annual look at what expectations are, how things are going, what your actual spending is, even if you're, maintaining that budget, because you may simply be taking all your excess money and doing things with it without realizing that there are future things that you're sabotaging by doing that. Maybe you've gone
Right.
out, maybe you're planning to upgrade your house from a, $250,000 house to a $500,000 house or even more without looking at the entire future, situation and plans for where things are going to be. So at least once a year, do some long range planning, look at your spending, and how things are going. Now, let's say you're having a little more, you're young, you're starting out, or you're even a little older and you've had a bunch, some children you've got to feed, and things are still tight. Then you may need to come all the way down to weekly if things are
Yeah.
are really situationally in a place where you need to keep very close track of everything and be able to make your money work for you. So there's no one right answer to that question.
Yeah.
I know for my wife and I, we don't keep a real strict budget now, but we do sit down weekly and talk about, what's coming up expense wise, where the money's going to come from, what our goals are for the money. And so, and that's more for communication than anything. It's good to be on the same page when you have a partner,
Yeah.
and it can really open doors to communication and affection and helping in relationships to do that more often than not. It can be tough at first when you first start learning to have those conversations, but after just a while, it builds a lot of trust and engenders a better relationship. So I would encourage people to consider that as well.
And so, one question, kind of growing off of the spending habits aspect of it. Um, what are your thoughts or maybe tips on a fluctuating income? So I know many people may be salary, but I know maybe many college students or many entry level people may still be hourly, or just depending on your job, you may be hourly to where your hours could be 31 week, maybe 40 the next, or maybe even 21 week, 25 the next, to where you've got that fluctuating balance of income. Do you have any kind of just overview tips of maybe what you've done to kind of help make sure that even though it's fluctuating, it's staying on track?
It can be challenging. This goes back to step one, psychology
Yeah.
again. So let's just talk about what you can do, and this takes some discipline, and that is to think realistically about what risk you face in your salary. How high might it be? Sure, you want to be optimistic, but let's take a little bit of a pessimistic view here about what we think things are going to end up being, say, on an annual basis. If all goes maybe not perfectly, but we still make money, right? You take that and create a baseline with your money for that. And then you divide that, say, by 52. That would give you your weekly average salary. Let's say you have a week where you make $500 and your average came out to $750 a week. Okay, so now you're underwater, right? Let's say the next week you make $1,000. So now you're right back where you want to be. You're right on par. So if you took that $750 a week number and you made your budget based on that, you're okay now. All right. Let's say you have another week you make 1,500 and you're like, oh, well, so what should you do? Should you up your number for your weekly budget? Or I don't suggest that, not immediately
Yeah.
at least. What I would
Okay.
suggest instead is you take that extra $500 and you start building up that emergency fund. Okay, and that way, if things don't go as planned, you have a way to smooth things out.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do is actually set up an entirely separate fund, and it can simply be a checking account where you say, okay, I'm going to move money over here when it seems to be above and beyond what I'm expecting for my average. So that $500 would then move over into this separate account. And then as it accumulates, you then have a way of saying, okay, let's say you've got, I'm going to make it easy for myself. Let's say you build up $5,200 in that other account. That's not emergency money. Now, let's say you've got your emergency money funded for, say you've got $15,000 in an emergency fund, 5,200 in another fund. Now you've got enough money in that other fund that you can add $100 a week to your salary, and you can just pull it weekly from that fund. And then as you have good weeks where you accumulate a little more money, you can throw it back into that account. And then if it accumulates where it's got 10,400 in it, then you've got enough to start taking an extra $200 a week. And so that's a way of giving yourself a raise based on what reality is. In practice, that takes more discipline than most of us are probably going to have.
Sure.
And so, the reality for me is I've always had that kind of income. I've always had these dividend checks that would come from my business that were above and beyond my salary, that I knew I was going to get a certain amount. I just didn't know how much. And so,
Yeah.
so what I've tried to do is just bank that money somewhere, and create savings, create investments. And I'm aggressive enough that I would put that money into an investment account, into a diversified ETF like VT, Vanguard's Total World Index. And that way, I don't have to add it to my budget. Instead, I can start accumulating some investments. Now, all of this is great, except that we need to put in our budget something we didn't talk about before when we were talking about the baskets, is if we're able to, we need to go ahead and start putting aside our retirement savings.
Yeah.
So just if you do have extra money, maybe rather than add it to your salary, so to say, we need to first start funding that Roth IRA, which is so important. That's such powerful money. Or we need to start funding that 401k, taking that match if we have one, that we should all take. And that may cut 3% off our so-called salary. So yeah,
Yeah.
even when so it's just there's a lot to think about when you have that fluctuating money. There really is,
Yeah.
and there's no, unfortunately, there's no super easy way. But just I'd say the biggest thing is making sure you have your priorities in order as to where your money should be going as it's coming in.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because I mean, even like when we take in those kind of difference between the short-term wants and long-term savings, and we kind of start putting it all together. It's really interesting, and then you take in maybe if your income fluctuates. There's just so many factors that you kind of have to just sit down and just look at, and but you know knowing and doing your best to not be overwhelmed with it. So there's that psychological piece as well. So there's just so many aspects to budgeting, and it's interesting to hear kind of how you've broken it down. Um, I I don't really have too much for you. We covered most of what I did have questions wise. Did you have anything else, maybe tips wise, or that you wanted to mention about budgeting?
I will I will end with this, and because it's been the key for me, and that is pay yourself first. So what do I mean by that? Um, Once you've sat down, you've made your budget, you've figured out that you can survive on what you're making, and hopefully you've gotten your budget so that you have room in it to fund that emergency fund. You've got room in it to pay off those debts. You've got room in it to start setting aside for retirement. You've got room in it for, all these things you've got room for that you've got
Right.
to make room for some things like paying your rent, paying your utilities. So by pay yourself first, put everything you can on auto pay, even your savings, even your retirement, even your emergency fund. You can set it up where every week, let's say your emergency fund needs to be at $10,000. How can you fund? Can you afford $100 a week? If you can, that's going to be about $5,000 a year. So in 2 years, you'll have your emergency fund completely funded. Let's say you can't afford to do retirement while you're funding that. Okay, we'll accept that. But let's say you can. Let's say you can afford to max out your Roth IRA, which is, about $7,000 a year. Divide that by the number of months or divide it by the number of weeks, however you want to do it, and set it up where that amount automatically comes out of your checking account every week, every month, whatever period of time you want to set it on, but have it be automatic and plan it so that you have enough money in your accounts to cover that based on your budget. That'll put some pressure on you to keep your account at that number that's needed to fund those things, and that'll keep you from spending down that money during the interim. You can do this for college savings for the kids. You can do this for that vacation. You can do this for just about anything you think of that you can put in your bucket of things that you're budgeting for. You can set it up so that you're paying yourself first and making it where that money's coming out automatically so that it's not sitting there asking you to spend it when you're shopping or thinking
Absolutely.
about that next thing. That is so powerful, especially when it comes to like retirement savings and emergency savings. And it has saved my butt numerous times over the years when it comes to like that emergency fund because I had somewhere to turn to where I could grab the money. The only time, like I say, I mentioned one time where that did not work out, and I dipped into the Roth IRA, which so I wish I hadn't done that in hindsight. That was a situation where I should have gone and gotten a home equity line of credit or something along those lines. But I did not know, what I know now about interest rates and about keeping money invested for the long term in that Roth. Um, but every other time, by paying myself first by having money automatically draft and go into that emergency account, and it built up to a point where when that emergency happened, I had somewhere to go and get the money without having to put, $20,000 on a credit card.
Right.
So then that way my $8,000 credit card didn't become 28,000. In other words,
Yeah.
I had already slipped a bit, but I was keeping that within an amount that I could keep paying on it and get it paid off within a reasonable amount of time, a few months time,
Yep.
get that paid
Yep.
off. Try to put yourself in a situation where you're never in a situation where you simply can't even imagine a way you could budget to pay it off. Because then we get into a situation where we may have to declare bankruptcy or something. Um, and that, if I have time, Nate, I have one more tip,
Yeah.
and that is, don't. Well, actually, I have two. I'm going to start with
Okay.
this one. Don't over leverage yourself. Okay. So,
Okay.
what are some things we do for leverage? We do home loans where we don't put enough money down. We do credit card loans where we put too much on credit cards and we're beyond a point that we can budget to pay that off. We lend money or borrow, or not lend, we borrow money from an expensive lender, like a payday loan lender or somewhere like that. But there are so many ways that we can over leverage ourselves. And so, only time you should be doing that is when you're saving a life or giving birth to a life or something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah.
It's just, you really need to try to avoid doing that and not let it be consumer spending that drives you to over leverage yourself. So, that's the biggest thing out there that can trip people up, I believe, especially if you're at a high rate of interest. Um, the um, the second tip is, don't take on risk where you can't afford the risk. So, uh,
Okay.
give you an example. I mean, the easy one is gambling.
Yeah.
If you're on
Sure.
a tight budget,
Yeah.
and you're gambling, especially if you're gambling to try to fix the problem,
Yeah.
then you need to go back to step one. We've got to work on the emotional side of things and figure out why are we sabotaging our financial life, and just go back to step one. Don't take on risk you can't handle. Real estate is a risk that some people will get into, especially when the market's hot.
Yeah.
The market's hot in real estate. We get tempted to get involved in real estate. I have seen it firsthand, through my business partner going out, buying a condominium when the market was hot. And then you know what happens to hot markets? They
Shut
cool
up.
off. Real
Yeah.
estate values start depressing a little bit, for whatever reason. It could be that we have a pandemic. It could be that we have a banking mortgage crisis. It could be that inflation takes off. There's so many ways that real estate could slow down, and then the next thing you know, um, you're underwater because you've leveraged yourself to get into that real estate, and you're having to declare bankruptcy because you simply never thought that you would have to fund that property through your own pocketbook, through your own accounts, and not through leveraging it and having tenants or flipping it or whatever your plan was. So, um, you know, anytime you take any kind of extraordinary risk, you should be in a place where you can afford to just lose everything. If you're
Right.
not in that place, then you should not be taking that risk. Um, and so just do normal, highly diversified investing. It's boring into whatever portion of equities and bonds meets your risk tolerance, and keep it at that. So those are my last two tips. Is
That's great.
don't over leverage, and don't take on more risk than you can handle. Um, and if you do those, and honestly, that's what, more than the budget itself, that's what gets most people with a decent income into the most trouble. Um,
Yeah.
and long term, it's just not saving for retirement and not
Right.
prioritizing that. Most people, they tread along, they go paycheck to paycheck, living life, or they spend their money living the good life. They don't save for retirement, and then they get to retirement and they wish they had 10 times more than
Yeah.
they do. So just keep that in mind as well. But
Yeah. Perfect. No, that was huge. Just, I mean, I've even seen at my age. There's a lot of people that are. It's very lax when it comes to how much they're trying to put into things without being concerned about whether there will be a return at all. Um, a lot of times there are going to be those things that, they might be expensive purchases, but the reason you're purchasing that is out of excitement, not not always logic. And it's very important to take a step back and look before you just take that step. And I think that's really what comes down to budgeting as a whole. Understanding your money, but not letting it overwhelm and become who you are to where that's all you're thinking about. Keep a life as well and enjoy that life as well. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about budgeting today. It's something that is very important to me right now, to just make sure that the money I have coming in at maybe a lower income is matching, if not of course less than what's going out. And I think that's very important for a lot of people my age, especially, I've seen with the job market, it's tough out there. And so especially a lot of people my age are coming in to try to get entry-level jobs, and it's just tough, and months of not being able to find a position. And so I get it. And so that's pretty much why I wanted to go over budgeting today, to kind of get your thoughts on, a few of those things that are really important when we're stepping into that mindset of what we should be taking into account. So
this has been a long episode. Do you mind if I do a little recap here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, number one, take care of your emotional self. Get that right. You're not going to be successful with budgeting, generally speaking, unless you have taken care of yourself with regard to that. Get some counseling if you need to. Number two, know your spending. Know where your money is going. That way you can plan it, prioritize it, and have a plan. Number three, have an emergency fund. That way when things don't go quite right, you have a way of staying on budget more likely than not. Number three, once you've got your spending down and you have a plan for an emergency fund, then start paying yourself first. Putting that money into all the buckets so that it doesn't seem like you have more than you do. You can see where it is and where it's going, and it helps to build things up to where you want them to be. Next one is don't over leverage, whether it be investing in real estate or your home or using credit cards too much. Try to avoid over leveraging yourself. And lastly, manage your risk. Don't take risks that you can't stomach. Really, if you're taking a risk that's not a well-diversified investment plan or something along those lines, you just simply shouldn't do it unless you can, in fact, afford to just lose all of that particular money that you're risking. And if it's not in your budget, you can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
So if that $20 bet on the game this weekend is not in your budget, then don't do it. If it's part of your blow money, it's in your budget, then go for it. Because then you can afford to lose it all. It's the same as going out and buying 4 cups of coffee.
Yep.
Go for it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you, Dad, for kind of breaking that down for me, and I'm excited to continue moving forward and with episode 3 next week.
Sounds good. I enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.